Fluency Week and a great long weekend. So I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the meeting number 34 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, March 10, 2021, and the motion adopted by the committee on April 15, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of Bill C-205, an act to amend the Health of Animal Act. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25, 2021, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants that this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted.
So in order to ensure the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to give you a few rules. So before speaking, wait until I recognize you by name. If you're taking part through video conference, click on the mic to deactivate the mute function. The microphones of participants in the room will be controlled, as usual, by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. I'd like to remind you that all comments of the MPs and witnesses must be addressed to the chair. When you're not speaking, please mute your microphone.
Welcome our witness for the first hour. So as an individual, we have Dr. Deb Stark. Welcome, Dr. Stark, to us, to our committee. And also from the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Mr. Keith Curry, First Vice President. Welcome, Mr. Curry, to our meeting. And with that, we'll start with opening statements. Probably Dr. Stark, if you want to start with a 5-minute opening statement, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. And I am pleased to accept the invitation to appear before this committee as you consider Bill C-205, an act to amend the Health of Animals Act. I want to start by emphasizing that I'm here because I was invited and I wish to be helpful. It's very important to me that it's clear that my comments do not represent the view of any of the organizations I'm involved with, either now or in the past. When I received this invitation and I asked, why do you want to talk to me? I was told it was because of my longstanding experience in various organizations. And with that in mind, I thought I might take a minute and just share some of my background. I am a veterinarian by training. I spent most of my career in the government of Ontario, including serving as Ontario's first chief veterinary officer, and at another time, the deputy minister of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Also at various times, I was the manager of the ministry's animal welfare programs and the assistant deputy minister in charge of the food safety programs. I'm now serving on several not-for-profit boards, including the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, or CAPI, the University of Guelph, and Ontario Genomics. And I'm also the chair of the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Departmental Audit and Advisory Committee. So I would stop here, but I assume your first question might be, what do you think about the bill? And so I offer the following comments. First, I want to thank you for your due diligence. Issues around animal diseases, farmer mental health, and protecting the welfare of both people and animals are all important conversations. Canadian agriculture plays an important role in global food security, in mitigating the impacts of climate change, and contributing to our economic success. Study after study has concluded that having an effective and efficient regulatory framework is important to this sector. So it's very good that you're closely scrutinizing this proposed changes. I know some of your members have asked if the problem is truly about a gap in the legislative or regulatory framework, or if it's more about the application of the existing rules. And I confess I have that question as well. I don't know the answer, but I think it's important to think about that. And I also know that some members have asked about the ability to enforce the provisions in this bill. And I think that's another important question too. Farmers expect to follow rules. They expect others to do the same, and to suffer consequences when they do not. I don't think it's going to help any farmer's mental health if expectations rise because this bill passes and then nothing really changes. I also think it's important to acknowledge that the activity this bill is trying to prevent stems from a core tension. In their 2020 survey of Canadians, the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity reported that 1/3 of those surveyed were concerned about the humane treatment of animals. Perhaps most of those people just want to be reassured, but I know some of them are concerned with specific practices on the farm, and I know others are completely against any kind of livestock and poultry production. Change can be and has been driven by the farmers themselves as research leads to better animal care, by consumers through the choices they make in the marketplace, and of course, by the activism of others. Animal agriculture isn't unique in this regard, and I don't think any of these drivers are going away soon. These points being made, I just want to conclude with my first comment. I don't think I have to tell this committee that our food production system is a Canadian success story. As long as the world chooses to eat meat, Canada can be a good place to raise those animals. Canadian farmers deserve a regulatory environment that protects their animals, themselves, and their assets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stark, for your statement. And now we'll go to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Mr. Keith Curry. Go ahead, Mr. Curry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the committee members. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture, CFA, and its members understand the critical importance of maintaining a safe and reliable food supply and protecting the safety of those who feed us. As such, CFA is in support of Bill 205, an act to amend the Health of Animals Act. Farmers and ranchers work hard to provide a safe and sustainable food supply for all Canadians. It is becoming increasingly difficult for farmer and agriculture owners to effectively produce food, fiber, and fuel due to ever-increasing trespassing events. Farms and farming operations have come under increasing threat from trespassers and activists who illegally enter property, barns, and buildings, causing significant disruptions to the entire agri-food sector. Once peaceful protests have now escalated into trespassing, invasions, breaking and entering into barns and other livestock facilities, theft, and harassment. The issue has now evolved to activities creating potential damage and liability far beyond the traditional. Things such as biosecurity breaches on livestock operations, biosecurity breaches in crop production operations, which often goes unnoticed, food tampering, damages from people intruding in confined spaces and impacting on the welfare of animals, activists moving animals off-site, sit-ins and protests around processing plants, the obstruction of trucks and drivers hauling our livestock to and from the farm and livestock processing facilities. The release of animals from production facilities, for example, fur-bearing animals and hogs, and trespassing and intrusive behavior on fish farms. These incidents distress farmers, their families, and employees, and threaten the health of livestock and crops when activists breach biosecurity protocols, ultimately putting the entire food system at risk. While current trespassing laws and regulations and fines and penalties may have been adequate to deal with nuisance trespassing in years past, the current new era of activism sees well-orchestrated and planned events that result in uninvited and unwelcome trespassers on farm properties, yards, buildings, and processing plants by people with a specific focused agenda, which is increasing at an alarming rate and is intended to cause economic stress for the producer. While typically trespassing laws are under the jurisdiction of provinces, often provincial statutes are not enough of a deterrent for people who commit trespass offenses. Bill C-205 would complement provincial legislation as an indicator of the severity of these offenses, and that protecting the agri-food industry is critical. Charges, when laid, are often dropped by the court system as they are considered minor infraction. While the CFA does support the passage of this bill and would urge all parliamentarians to get behind it, we do have suggestions for some changes. The amendment of 9.1 of the bill, which currently reads, "No person shall, without lawful authority or excuse, enter a building or other enclosed place in which animals are kept, knowing that or being reckless as to whether entering such a place could result in the exposure of the animals to a disease or toxic substance that is capable of affecting or contaminating them," seems to indicate that unless you're fully aware that you are willfully reckless, the violation is excusable. A recent incident on an Ottawa area mink farm had the judge acquit someone who broke and enter of a mischief charge because although they entered the building illegally, no harm came to the animals. So in the judge's mind, there was no violation. We'd like to see that change so that the person without lawful authority enters a building or enclosed place in which animals are kept to prevent the exposure of the animals to a disease or toxic substance that is capable of affecting or contaminating them. And as well, add in anyone who aids or abets someone in this shall be considered party to that contravention. As you heard Dr. Stark mention, mental health is becoming a big issue around activism. Farmers already face a wide variety of daily stressors that affect their mental wellness, being weather, environment, market fluctuations, farm labor, social isolation, just to name a few. Trespass and activism are now an additional growing source of stress. Continuing to allow on-farm trespass and barn break-ins to occur is not only threatening the viability of Canadian agriculture, but also posing a serious threat to farmer mental health and well-being. Bill C-205 recognizes the mental health crisis in agriculture and aims to support farmers and farming businesses by introducing new protections against trespass and biosecurity breaches. I should also add that livestock transporters and processing facilities also under similar tremendous mental stress from activism and activists. I'll leave it at that, and I'll close, leaving more time for our witnesses to ask questions of me, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. Now, just before I go, I want to welcome Mr. Barlow, sponsor of the bill, as a committee member today, and also my Atlantic colleague, MP Andy Fillmore. So welcome to both of you, including the rest of the committee. And we'll start with our first round of questions for 6 minutes each. We'll start with the sponsor himself, Mr. John Barlow. Go ahead, Mr. Barlow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good to see so many of my Ag Committee colleagues once again, and welcome to Mr. Fillmore as well. Mr. Curry, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay, and I appreciate your intervention, your testimony here. But what we heard at the last meeting was members of the CFIA officials, saying that the enforcing Bill C-205 would be difficult during, current resources. But I think what the CFIA failed to mention during their testimony is that the burden is not entirely on them. They have the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. This is something that they are doing already. There are enforcement officials at CFIA, which include inspectors, veterinary inspectors, as part of the CFIA legislation. But it also includes the Enforcement and Investigation Service investigators who are already doing this type of work. But to go with your testimony, Mr. Curry, I would believe that through this pandemic, if this has shown us anything, it's then when something is prioritized by the governments and officials are given the right direction, what is sometimes considered a difficult problem certainly becomes possible. Would you not agree with the statement that how important this issue is, that the federal government to show leadership on this issue and not just defer this to the provinces when it's convenient to do so? This is something that the federal government needs to show leadership on?
Thank you, Mr. Barlow, for the question, and the answer is absolutely. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I think this bill really complements current provincial legislation. It strengthens both provincial and federal legislation on protecting farms, farmers, and farm families and employees. This new, as I mentioned, this new era of activism is really ramped up. It's well planned. It's well orchestrated, and activists, they know what they're doing. And what's happening is, to your point, our enforcement is not happening on the farm or at facilities. It just simply isn't. And part of that is because police do not have enough tools in the toolbox. They also don't believe that the court system will look at this properly and actually convict. And if they're not going to convict, then they don't want to lay charges and have to put the whole system through the process of going through the courts, only to having it drop, much like the recent case I referred to on the mink farm in the Ottawa area. So I think if there's lots of teeth in legislation that will, first of all, prove as a deterrent, but if there is activism happening and break-ins happening, the police are confident in laying charges that something will happen as it goes through the court system. So it will also require some education of the entire penal system to make sure people understand what it is we're dealing with back out on the farm.
And following with that same train of thought, Mr. Curry, is currently the CFIA is saying we should leave this to the provinces, but in fact there are only 2 provinces that have legislation to deal with this in place now. Saskatchewan is kind of going through the process, but that leaves the vast majority of provinces and territories have nothing protecting the biosecurity on farms, and you certainly rightfully spoke about to the impact this is having on the mental health of our farmers and ranchers and processors. But is it not also important to have that national platform there, or national means to regulate this and enforce this, where many times even at the provincial level we're seeing merely a couple $100 fine for mischief, which is really no deterrent? We need a national deterrent. Would you agree with that statement, that there has to be a level playing field across Canada?
Yes, I would absolutely agree. And by having a national act in place as a deterrent, it's also leads to consistency right across, right from coast to coast to coast in enforcement. And I think that is equally important, so that people understand that we can't risk the safety of our livestock and our people looking after them.
Another comment by CFIA was that there has to be an acceptable risk involved. That that's part of their job, is that they can't enforce some of these things, and that the risk of a biosecurity outbreak is something that they have to accept. I would strenuously disagree with that. And maybe just from your perspective, what would be the impact, Mr. Curry? Let's say if we had an outbreak of African swine fever on a hog farm in Canada, or an outbreak of hoof and mouth disease, and certainly. I saw firsthand and lived the impact BSE had on my part of the Alberta. But what would be the impact if we had a single outbreak of African swine fever or another animal-borne disease in Canada? What would be the impact of that?
Well, diseases like ASF or African swine fever are very highly transmissible. I'll throw avian influenza in there as well. AI is very devastating to poultry flocks. And quite often the quarantine area is not just the farm that it occurs on, it's a larger area where birds actually have to be destroyed. You can talk about infectious diseases coming into cattle operations. You can even go as far to say bringing in invasive species into into crops, which could impact farms' livestock operations as well. So it's devastating to not only to the producer where it happens, but in the entire area which it happens quite often is affected. So it's multiple producers. It's hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that this affects, and it potentially, depending on the livestock, could create shortages in that product as well. And so it really does have a devastating effect, which is why we need some strength in our trespassing laws.
And I find it interesting, Mr. Curry, that that the activists and the protesters are there to protect the health of animals, which I think we could all agree with. But if there is an outbreak, what happens to those animals?
Well, typically, depending on what the outbreak is, of course, they may have to be destroyed. It depends. If, not only that, when activisms, in particular in poultry farms, but all other livestock as well, when activists enter those facilities, these animals are not used to them. So they get extremely excited. They're scared. I have a very large duck farm near me who had activisms break in, and there was hundreds of birds had to be put down because they pardon for lack of a better term, freaked out, and they injured themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Okay. We're a little bit over time, so thank you, Mr. Barlow. We'll move to Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes.
Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Drouin.
I do want to thank the both witnesses for being before committee. Certainly, I think all committee members agree with the objectives of the bill, but we may not necessarily agree with the how to get to that particular point. One question I did have to Dr. Stark, and I'm not going to ask which hat you're going to wear, but just with regards to biosecurity and how that has evolved over the last 20, 30 years. I know when I was 7 years old, which was 30 years ago, walking onto a farm, I didn't have to wear special equipment. But now I do have, whether farms in my own riding, I do have to wear special equipment to go on the farm. So in terms of risks of having strangers walking onto a farm, what dangers does that present in terms of biosecurity?
So thank you very much for the question. And again, I'm not wearing a hat of any particular organization. It's just my hatless head today that I'm here. And you're right. Biosecurity expectations have changed. People used to welcome people to come into their barn, and it was seen as a sign of friendliness. And as you say, now the signs are up, the doors are closed, and before you can get into barns, you're expected to change clothes and go through disinfection procedures and things like that. And the risk really comes, so that being said, the risk really comes if whoever is coming in has been exposed to a disease somewhere else. And so it's really hard, and this is one of the challenges. If you haven't been near any sick animals, if you haven't been near any of that particular disease agent, then you are really not likely bringing it onto the farm. It's when you have been near those animals or that agents that the risk increases. And unfortunately, we don't always know. And that's the problem. And that's why farmers have implemented standards that says this has to apply to everybody, because we can't take a chance that you know whether you've been near a sick animal or not, or been exposed to a virus. We can't take that chance. So the standards are set. Mostly they are kind of consistent across the country, but lots of them are implemented at the provincial level through various organizations like the dairy farmers or the pork producers, setting up standards that work for their particular situation. And then they move out across the country that way. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And I'll move on to Mr. Curry. Good to see you before committee. Mr. Curry, I know you were instrumental in lobbying the Ontario government to pass the Security from Trespassing and Protecting Food Safety Act when you were wearing your OFA hat. Just wondering, do you know if anybody has been essentially subject to that particular act since it's passed in Ontario, and whether it's working?
There has been one charge laid under it. I don't think it's made it through. The best of my knowledge, it has not made it to the court system yet. So has it been successful? I guess we'll see. We are in the season of activism. Typically warmer weather months are when activists are more prevalent. So we'll see. It's a matter of educating enforcement officers as well to fully understand the parameters around the penalties and to enforce them. So hopefully the correct answer is nobody's been charged because nothing's happening, but we know that won't be the case.
Okay, and one quick comment I want to make. I know public trust was identified under the CAP initiatives over the 5 years, and I'm wondering whether or not there's been any education campaign amongst the activists on the reasons why they shouldn't be walking into such environments, and whether or not you know if there's been any organizations that stepped up and has asked for funding to launch those campaigns, because I certainly believe in some of the Security from Trespassing and Protecting Food Safety Act in Ontario. Certainly believe in it, but I commend my colleague Mr. Barlow for presenting this bill, but I certainly don't believe the CFIA may be the right folks to do this. And especially given that now you'd have multiple levels of government being responsible for one particular aspect on the farm, then if there's too many monkeys in charge, then nobody's in charge. And I'm wondering, are you aware of any organizations that has applied for such funding or is doing that education campaign so we prevent those types of events from happening?
I'm not aware of any organization that has applied for it, but you have to keep in mind when you enter into this public trust type of campaign on animal husbandry in particular, that becomes a battle quite often in social media. And, you know, you're dealing with activists who have no idea what they're talking about with respect to animal husbandry. For those of you on the committee, if you just look at the National Farm Animal Code Council, who create these codes of husbandry for our animal producers, there's a long list of organizations that are involved there. It's not just farmers. It's Humane Canada, for example. It's restaurants. It's the whole value chain are part of this. So we have their input on how we need to handle our animals quite properly. So, but getting into a battle on social media is one you never win. So it's a tough one to get into, that public trust on animal safety. Most of these activists, as I said, not only do they not farm, but their real main goal is to get you to stop eating meat. It's not about whether they think you're doing something wrong. It's they just want you to stop eating meat. That's the goal behind a lot of this. So it's a tough road to haul if we're trying to get into a public battle with them.
Agreed on that, but just to educate so they can protest, they can come to MP's offices and I'll give them free coffee if they want to. Just don't be on the farm.
If I could just add, MP Druin, good to see you as well again. One of the things that's occurred in the last 15 months is that people have become more aware of food security and have a better understanding that we need to make sure we look after the people providing the food. So they've taken a deeper interest in agriculture in general. I think that is a positive thing that we need to capitalize on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Drouin, Mr. Curry. I'm a little bit generous on time because of we're not going to be able to get to it in the second round. So if you noticed, I've kind of let you go a little bit, but eventually I got to stop it. So, but anyway, so we'll continue, and I think it'll work out fine. Monsieur Perron, allez-y pour.
Mr. Perron, go ahead for 6 minutes and a few seconds. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for coming to be here with us today. It's highly appreciated that you've taken the time to do so. Mr. Curry, what interests me, I have all sorts of questions, but you formulated a proposal for amending Article 9.1. Could you please repeat that? If I understood you clearly, you're suggesting to remove the part that says knowing that there is a risk to animal health. Could someone pretend to know that they didn't know there was a risk and not be subject to a fine? Did I understand you clearly?
Thank you. Yes, this I didn't know better excuse is being used quite frequently in the court, and many of our judges in particular are stating, well, because there's potentially no harm done, we can acquit you of this mischief charge that's being presented. And I keep referencing there was because it's recent, the mink farm just outside of Ottawa, where that very reason was used by the judge. Yes, the person got into the building, but no damage was caused, so therefore I'm going to acquit of that charge. What we are proposing is that a slight change to 9.1, just to say no person shall without lawful authority enter a building or other enclosed place in which animals are kept to prevent the exposure of the animals to a disease or toxic substance that is capable of affecting or contaminating them. It's a simple change to take away that, well, nothing happened, therefore I'm not guilty aspect of the bill.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse.
Thank you very much for your answer. You also said that you wanted to add people who were accomplices. Could you please explain that further?
Quite often you will have people who actually are caught in a facility or caught doing some trespassing on a property that get charged, but lots of times these people have help in accomplishing their end goal of getting in, doing a sit-in, trespassing on property. So anyone that is known to have aided or abetted these individuals in that act should also be held responsible for being part of the act itself too.
Okay, je vous remercie beaucoup pour les prix.
Okay, thank you very much for these clarifications. Mrs. Stark, we understand that you were here on an individual basis. So do you, as an individual, think it's a good idea to adopt Bill C-205?
I think the intent of the bill is good. I think the problem that the bill is trying to address is real. I agree with Mr. Curry and the CFA that I think these things are getting worse, and people who oppose animal agriculture are getting bolder. And so in that way, in terms of sending a signal, I think that that's a noble effort. As I said in my comments, I do really question whether or not how this can be enforced. And again, I think we've heard the CFIA say it kind of falls apart in the courts. That's been the experience in the past. And simply putting another rule on the book only to have it fall apart in the end, I'm not sure is going to achieve anything.
Je comprends parfois.
So I understand that as well. So thank you. The witnesses have been telling us so far that that's the problem, that current regulations, be they provincial or federal, require evidence that's very hard to establish on secondary effects. For example, a illness that can appear sometime after the trespassing. It's hard to make the connection between the two. So if it's on a farm and it just becomes trespassing, would that not simplify the work so their simple presence could be sanctioned? Could that help us avoid the problem of making the connection?
I'm sorry, are you asking me that?
Yep. Oui.
Yes.
Sorry. And I am not a lawyer, so I have no ability to really give you a definitive answer on that. I think that, and Mr. Curry may choose to respond. I think in some ways that's the intent that they're trying to address with the amendment, which is to just kind of say if you're there, assume that this may cause problems, and then you can take action. But I really have no ability to give you any kind of insight of any value.
Okay. Monsieur Curry.
Mr. Curry, what's your opinion on this?
Of the protection of animals and their handlers, their owners, employees that work around farms is good. With respect to the act itself, it may need further wording to enclose things like pasture fields. It may need to include processing facilities, these types of areas where animals do exist and potentially could run into some trespassing as well. I'll leave that to the smarter minds to make sure that they encompass all that needs to be done there, and we're happy to have those conversations. But what we have now is not working. So if it's only strengthened a little bit, it's better than nothing.
And do you believe that the enforcement of C205, if it's adopted, would be a problem, as what's happening now? Do you think it could easily be enforced?
I think any piece of legislation could be enforced. It's whether or not there's a willingness to do it in a lot of cases. We have rules. We need to have them enforced.
Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, my time's up, I think, or do we still have time for a question? Go ahead for a quick question, Mr. Perron. Perfect. Quick question, quick answer. So, Mr. Curry, what do you say to people who tell us that there's a risk that there cannot be any more disclosing of bad treatment of the animals? People are telling us this could have that effect.
Use the ag-gag law as a defense, and the reality is, if there are bad farmers out there, I want you to find them. It's like saying every parent is a bad parent, every pet owner is a bad pet owner. That's just not the case with farmers and their livestock. They truly do the best they can, and almost all the commodities do their own inspections on farm as well, and so they're very strict rules.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Now, Mr. McGregor, go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for helping us with our understanding of C205. Mr. Curry, maybe I'll start with you. In your opening statement, you did use the word trespass a lot, and you did mention that activists had become a lot bolder in their activities. There were, a lot of these have now transgressed over to break and enter, property damage, and so on. In your mind, do you think C205 is primarily designed to stop trespassing or biosecurity? Like, which comes top of mind for you when you're thinking C205 as the priority of the bill?
Thank you for the question, and I'm not sure that I would prioritize one over the other for this reason. For these reasons, biosecurity is incredibly important for the protection of our animals. But the act of trespassing in itself is something that's creating tremendous amount of stress to our farm families and our employers, as I've mentioned. And what I'm fearful of is that someone might decide to take the law into their own hands. And that would scare me even more because they don't feel like there's enough adequate protection through the law, through regulations, through legislation to help protect them. So both trespassing and biosecurity are a big issue here.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We across Canada, as you know, we have had some instances on farms, notably mink farms, where it's actually been employees who have accidentally brought in a disease to the animals. So they were there with lawful authority and excuse, and through their actions, they may not have been following proper protocol, but they did accidentally transfer a disease to the population. Now, C205 does use that language of being there with lawful authority and excuse. Do you think there's room to amend this bill so that, you know, employees are held to the same standards, or if that's not, in your view, the correct path to take, what should we be doing to ensure that standards are uniform, whether you're a protester or a farm employee?
Well, certainly, I believe it's up to each individual farm operation to make sure they educate their employees on the proper biosecurity protocols that are in place. All livestock commodities that I know of have, have resources that farmers can access to educate their employees on proper procedures and protocols. I'm not sure that having an act that will penalize an employee because they made a mistake in that regard is really fair, unless that employee got hired under false pretenses in order to get access to the building, and then that's a different situation. But otherwise, I wouldn't want to say that this act should try and handle a mistake by an employee bringing a disease in.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the Bill C-205 in that first clause does make reference to a building or other enclosed place in which animals are kept. So in your mind, you know, what if we had a hypothetical scenario where protesters did gain access to a farm property but did not come anywhere close to animals? Is that where provincial laws would be applicable and not this federal act? I guess that's where the jurisdictional waters have the potential of being muddied in that hypothetical situation. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, certainly you're correct. There is a little muddying of the lines there, but I think provincial and federal rules can complement each other. It would depend on the situation, but there's real danger, potential danger of bringing in infection of some kind, even just by being on the property without even necessarily getting right into the barn, because there are, and Dr. Stark's better to speak to this than I am, but there is organisms that can live in the soil that the animals may have access to once they're outside. So certainly it's we're trying to encompass all the areas in which animals may be housed, whether it's outdoors or indoors.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Dr. Stark, I'll turn to you if you wanted to maybe add some comments on that last question. But before you do, in our previous meeting on this bill, we did have the chief veterinarian for the CFIA give testimony, Dr. Komal, and he did testify that you know, scientific literature provides little evidence that farm trespassers have transmitted pathogens, and that he said that, you know, human beings would have to have close, prolonged contact with animals in order to transmit a disease. So if you have any comments on the previous question I asked Mr. Curry, but also any commentary on what Dr. Komal told this committee as well, I would appreciate that.
Well, I start by saying that I agree with Dr. Komal. I'm not up to date on the science, but I certainly respect him and his position, and I don't think he would make that comment to this committee without making sure of his facts. And his point about the exposure is kind of the point that I was trying to make, that in order to transmit a disease, you have to be near a sick animal to you know, pick up that virus and then move it. Mr. Curry is right. Some of them move through the air, and some of them can transfer really easily. And I do not want to discount that there are some viruses that move like that, but certainly not all of them. So it's you know, they generally you have to be pretty close and then move it through. Yeah, and the difference about the employee and you know, versus someone that's comes on the farm. The only thing I would say is that generally, I think we expect employers to deal with their employees. And so if there was a breach in following farm protocol, I would expect that the farm manager or the farm owner would be the one that would be dealing with that, as opposed to using any kind of tool such as this.
Thank you. And maybe just my final question, you know, in terms of agricultural laws, some fall under the stick category, some follow under the carrot category. And so, you know, going back to an earlier exchange between Mr. Drouin and Mr. Curry on building that trust between the agricultural community and the public at large, you know, do you have any suggestions about how we can use more of a carrot approach to build that trust between the public? Because you did mention in your testimony that, you know, about 1/3 of Canadians are concerned. Do you have any ideas you can share with the committee?
Well, first, I think I would like to highlight the incredible investment that the food and agriculture sector in this country has already made in terms of building that trust. So the organization I referenced, the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, is a not-for-profit organization that began in the hands of farmers who said, we have got to make sure that we stay in touch with our customers and they understand what we're doing, and we understand when they have some concerns about that, and we sit around and talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Stark. Sorry to cut you off.
No.
And thank you, Mr. McGregor. Committee members, we looked at the kind of the time frame we have. So if we extend by about between 10 and 15 minutes, we can get the full. So do I have the consent of the committee to finish the second round, which would be roughly 15 minutes, and then it'll probably push our next one into maybe 10 extra minutes. Are we all good on that? I think everybody's good. Okay, so let's start the second round, and Mr. Epp for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, Dr. Stark and should be a Dr. Curry, for excellent testimony. I'd like to start with you, Dr. Stark. Good to see you again. We heard from officials, and it's been mentioned that you know, this legislation is not particularly necessary. This is all covered under provincial trespassing. That potentially this could muddle provincial-federal relations or federal provincial jurisdiction. You mentioned in your testimony, you know, sometimes some core tensions. I know in some of your hats you've had to deal with some of those core tensions. How do provincial officials presently work with the CFI when they're investigating offenses? Would that relationship change and be strengthened with the passage of this act?
It's thank you very much. I guess I'm supposed to address the chair, Mr. Chair, but it is nice to see you, Dave, again. So I can mostly speak from Ontario, but certainly provinces talk, and the federal and provincial ag departments talk frequently and often. So I think I can represent most of the provincial colleagues when I say that working relationship on the ground is very good. Agriculture is a shared jurisdiction, and areas like food safety and animal health don't respect provincial and federal boundaries. They really don't care who's the diseases, don't care whose jurisdiction it is. And so officials need to work hand in hand to really put over, make sure the system works well. I think, you know, what would change if this bill was in place? I think I go back to it. It depends on what kind of resources the CFIA is given. And if the CFIA is fully resourced and given the mandate to kind of take control and enforce it all themselves, it may make very little difference. History would suggest that there would probably be some kind of an outreach to the provincial officials trying to figure out who is on the ground closer to the farms. Certainly provincial officials are usually more closely on the farm and more on the ground, quite frankly. And so we'd probably be trying to work with them.
Thank you. Picking up on MP Alistair's McGregor's question with the testimony from Dr. Como, he did say that it took, it takes time for disease to be transmitted. Yet we also know that protesters are moving from farm to farm. We had that happen. Protesters from BC entered a farm in Alberta. We had a virus transmitted into a Quebec hog farm. So you talked about exactly that concern. We also have an issue around perception. I know the addition of perception on conflict of interest, what that did to that legislation and change it. I think we have an issue of perception here as well with people entering the farm. Could you make some comments, please?
I'm sorry, about the perception of people, the risk?
Exactly, the perception of risk when protesters are moving farm to farm, to the mental health of the farmer and to the safety of our food system.
I think the risk to an individual farmer who has someone come out and into their barn and with their animals, where they have their families, can be significant. I think the risk of bringing the disease, I think you've already kind of identified that. That depends a lot where those individuals have been in the past 24 or 48 hours, what they've been exposed to, and how close they can get to the animals in the barn, whether they touch them or they're just at the door taking pictures. So that one is much more murky to me. But I would not want to leave for a minute the impression that I don't think there are risks.
Thank you. I'd like to direct a question to Mr. Curry. We've received committee testimony from a veterinarian, from Jean-Jacques Conabon, and I'm going to read a quote to you. He writes to us, "Animal abuse is a staple of the agri-food industry and is not always the result of an intent to do harm. Most of the time, the abuse and subsequent suffering is either the result of following standard practices in the industry. In Canada, these practices are listed in the National Farm Animal Care Council's Code of Practice for the care and handling of farm animals, or disregarding these standard practices." Can you comment on that statement, please?
Well, I'm a little disappointed in hearing those words. Having said that, veterinarians are certainly someone who have a close relationship with our livestock producers. They're themselves, along with nutritionists, are a vital part of any operation. But to have a blank statement saying that farmers abuse their animals, even though it may be unintentional, I really have a hard time buying into that one. As I look at all of our different codes of practice that are commodities enforced, commodities themselves, especially supply management, have the authority to shut you down if you're not abiding by the proper codes of conduct. So,
thank you, Mr. Curry. Yes, we'll move on. Mr. Lewis, for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both our witnesses for being here for this great discussion. It's very welcome. I appreciate that. I would begin my questioning with Dr. Stark. We've mentioned it before that laws are usually meant to change things, and I'm not exactly clear what gap we're trying to fix, because as mentioned a number of times, a number of provinces, including mine in Ontario, and Dr. Stark, you've mentioned that, already have existing provincial laws. And I know that laws like this in the US, the bills like these have been struck down. I think 6 states have struck them down, and they're being challenged in Ontario right now. And we do have local trespassing on private property laws, which already address the break-ins or illegal entries on a farm. So we often see, and we've heard in some testimonies and questioning witnesses, that we see cases of intrusion on farms that producers do not address the complaints to the proper local authorities. So in your opinion, Dr. Stark, what are the barriers to use the means that are already available to farmers to ensure safety? What makes them not call the local authorities?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And to be honest, I was not aware of situations where farmers did not call local authorities. I'm more familiar with situations where farmers do call local authorities, and then in the end, nothing happens. And I do think that, at least again in Ontario, and from the experience that I've seen and what I've heard, people are discouraged. Farmers are discouraged that it would seem that people can walk onto their farms and into their barns, and they feel they can be doing all the right things, and it's allowed to happen. And somewhere charges are not laid, or they're not successful. So I'm afraid I can't add much more than that.
Okay, maybe I could ask Mr. Curry then. Would instead of calling the authorities, would the issue then be in the laying of charges that the farmers might call the local authorities, but then choose not to press charges? And if that is the case, what kind of solutions could we do to help enforce the local laws or even provincial laws that already exist?
So thank you. In some cases, people are in and out quickly, and we just don't have a chance to apprehend them. Dr. Stark is right in that in many cases, the authorities just don't simply put it as a priority to come to the farm, and farmers get frustrated. They get to the point where they throw their hands up and say, "Why bother if nobody's going to come and help protect me?" Unless there's a direct threat to human safety that's noted in a phone call to police, they typically don't address they put it way down on the list of priorities. I understand that our local police forces are stressed as far as manpower as well, but we just aren't getting any action from authorities as far as coming out to investigate these on-farm break-ins and trespassing.
Okay, thank you. We've heard in, maybe I would go back to Dr. Stark, we've heard in testimony how essential it is to have strong biosecurity measures to protect animal health and well-being against outbreaks and infectious organisms, as well as to protect the mental health of farmers and the marketability of products. So, the CFIA provides a list of possible sources for infectious organisms, which include live, dead, or sick animals, animal products, family or staff, clothing, equipment, vehicle transportation, even birds and wildlife. So can you talk about protecting biosecurity and the major issues? Because I did not find that that any kind of animal advocacy or protests fit that mold of causing disease outbreaks. So can you kind of rank some of the top ones for biosecurity so we know how to continue to protect our animals and the farmers?
It's a challenge to do that because birds are not the same as cattle. Cattle are not the same as pigs. Pigs are not the same as horses. And so it depends a lot on the species and it depends a lot on the organism. But generally, the principle is to try and keep the animal or bird from being exposed to the organism by multiple barriers. And so that is making sure that everything that they're being fed and the bedding and everything is all clean, things like that. That is making sure that humans and we know that humans can bring viruses and bacteria into barns, and so making sure that is minimize that risk. It means making sure keeping buildings built far enough so that if there is airborne kind of viruses, those happen. I'm sorry, I know I'm not really answering your question, but it's those multiple barriers and just trying to make sure that the animal is not exposed is the fundamental principle of biosecurity.
No, I appreciate that. At the end of the day, that's what we're looking for, is to protect the animals and the farmers. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Dr. Stark. And now, Monsieur Perron, allez-y pour 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Perron, go ahead, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Curry, I'd like to come back with you. We heard some people said it would put a damper on people sounding the alarm. What are the current mechanisms in terms of regulation? Say someone suspects ill treatment on a farm. Is it really necessary to disclose this by trespassing, or are there other ways of doing it?
Well, there are a number of different ways. Certainly, we've talked about the animal codes practice that are in place, and in a lot of cases, the commodity organizations themselves do inspections and find any wrongdoings, as well as I mentioned. Both nutritionists and veterinarians are frequent on the farm dealing with livestock, so they, have an obligation to deal with these kinds of situations as well. Typically, most people, majority of people are good keepers of animals, by human nature. Are there bad people out there? Yes. If you're driving down the road and you see an animal in distress for reasons that are out of the animal's control, then most provinces have some type of legislation in place, whether it's an OSPCA Act or whether it's a specific piece of legislation that deals with animal husbandry, and there's lines to call. If you're just a general public, there's numbers you can call, authorities you can call to investigate, and they have a duty to investigate those operations if there's a suspect of poor animal husbandry. There are a number of ways. Breaking into a barn is not the right way to do it.
Merci.
Thank you. You also talked about possible regrettable events that could take place, and if some producers want to take the law into their own hands. But now I'd like you to tell us a bit more about the mental health of producers.
Farming and ranching is a stressful job because of all the elements that are out of our control. But when you pile on top of it the opportunity for activists to come into your property without permission, to potentially not only endanger your buildings by breaking in, but potentially affecting all of your livestock, either through bringing in a disease or simply letting them go. Animals like mink don't typically do well out in the outdoor environment. So you open up a barn at a mink farm and let them all go. They're not going to survive. Yet the people that do that don't get charged with animal cruelty.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time. Mr. McGregor, go ahead for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Curry, in one of your earlier exchanges, you made mention of the fact that many farmers in many cases have kind of just given up on reporting to the authorities because there's such a storied track record of investigation and follow through to an eventual conviction. Did I get you right on that?
By and large, and I should clarify that I'm dealing with my experience here mostly in Ontario.
Okay, so because I just wondering, I mean, is maybe the answer that we need more police resources to? Because I mean, my community is facing the same thing. Sometimes the RCMP, they've got their hands full with an opioids crisis, and they don't always get to property-related crime because we're down 11 members in our RCMP detachment. Do you think that might be also a solution? Like, you can pass all the laws you want, but if you don't have the police to enforce them, we're not really going to get much traction.
Yes, I would say that's a fair statement, and I would agree with Dr. Stark's earlier comment about CFIA as well, also needing better resources and able to do their job as well on the enforcement end. But certainly, police services are lacking in funding to adequately give us the support in rural Canada.
Thank you. And Dr. Stark, maybe finally with you, our committee did receive a letter from Humane Canada, which I'm sure you're very well aware of and have worked with over your many years of service. And of course, they are the federation of all the SPCA organizations across Canada. They have written a letter stating quite clearly that they are against C205. And I guess, do you have any comment on when an organization that is tasked with enforcing animal welfare on farms comes out against the bill that we're studying? Do you have any comment to add to that, or does that elicit any reaction out of you?
Well, I have worked with Humane Canada. Humane Canada is actually the group that sits, Mr. Curry talked about the development of the national farm animal codes, and they sit at that table, or they have it in the past. And they, as you say, they are an umbrella, a voluntary organization of animal protection, animal care groups, humane societies. I'm not aware that they have any mandate themselves to enforce any kind of legislation or any resources to do so. So, am I surprised that they've said they're no? I don't know. I'm not close enough to understand how they make decisions within their organization. I know they represent a lot of animal welfare organizations, and I'm sure it's not easy for them to come to consensus on many of the positions that they take.
Thank you, Dr. Stark, and thank you, Mr. McGregor. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have. In very interesting conversation. I want to thank Dr. Deb Stark for appearing as an individual. Thanks for your experience and knowledge into that. And of course, Mr. Curry with the Federation of Agriculture. Thank you so much for your help on this study. And with that, we'll break for just a couple of minutes, and then we'll be right back with the second panel. So we'll suspend for just the time to change the pounds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today, on the second panel, we have an individual, Dr. Jean-Pierre Vaillancourt, full professor, University of Montreal. Welcome to our committee, Dr. Vaillancourt. Thank you. And also from the Canadian Pork Council, Mr. Rick Bergen, President of the Board, and Mr. René Droit, First Vice President of the Board. So welcome to both of you to our committee, and also, thank you, of the Pork Producers of Quebec, Mr. David Duval, the President. Welcome to our committee, Mr. Duval. Thank you. And that being said, we will start with a opening speech of 5 minutes each. So Dr. Vaillancourt, could you please go ahead? Yes, thank you. So I'll be very brief. I provided a document. I'll be speaking French. I can answer in English if I'm asked English questions. I mentioned 3 points in my document. I want to present a fourth one. The risks that we have when we have trespassing, that includes the well-being of the animals. So people say they've gone onto the farm and there have been no consequences. They say that, but that we know more or less, because those animals, depending on the species, can injure themselves, can be stressed to the point of that it has an impact on their immune system, and then they can have more problems with infections after that. Somebody who doesn't know how to walk in a barn where there's poultry could kill some because they go and they hide in the corners when they panic. We can see that. And we also see that with hogs, with the sows that can crush their young. So there's well-being of the animals, and also there's infectious diseases. And contrary to what I heard a few minutes ago, you don't need proximity to an infected animal to transmit an infection. I could maybe talk about that later. The risk, every time there is a visit, there is a risk. That's well documented, be it for mandatory declaration diseases, so African swine fever, avian influenza. So it's documented. It's not every time there's an intrusion, but the risk has been well documented. Also for endemic illnesses, be it SRRP, the PRRS for pork, or infectious bronchitis or laryngotracheitis. So this is a problem where diseases can have an impact. There's also a risk to the individuals themselves. People who go into a barn building who don't know what they're doing can be contaminated. It can be Salmonella, Campylobacter, or other fevers. So there are various conditions and also situations where they can injure themselves. So there's a risk there. And the fourth point that I wanted to raise is based on my experience in the U.S. I was a professor at North Carolina State University. And there, on September 11th, 2001, when the Homeland Security Department was created, I was asked by a member of Congress who was telling me that even though the rates were decreasing in New York, there were two operations victims of bioterrorism in the American Midwest, and that was an Al-Qaeda. They were people who were angry at a producer and who voluntarily contaminated two operations. So there is that possibility. We often think about people who want to protect animals and who are defending animal rights. They want to free them. But also there are people who are ready to go very far in the opposite direction. I had a case of a former sister-in-law of a producer who got angry and who decided when it was 40 degrees in mid-July in North Carolina to close off the water supply one evening, with thousands of birds that died after that within a few hours. So there can be consequences due to infectious pathogen transmission, but also there are other problems which are not necessarily infectious and which can be caused by individuals who don't belong in those farms. So I also wanted to add a comment. We read a text by a veterinarian, a Quebec veterinarian, who is lacking in ethics on the veterinary level. And so we pointed him out because that person says that veterinarians who work in animal production are not ethical. So there we're talking about a person who's a vegan activist, anti-speciesist. So even if we are a veterinarian, we have to be careful. There's someone who's an extremist, and I'm denouncing that person or that situation. So I'll stop now to give time to others. Thank you very much, Dr. Vaillancourt. So now the Canadian Pork Council. It's Mr. Rick Bergman or René Watt. You have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
For this before the House of Commons. Bill C-205 is very important for Canadian pork producers. My name is Rick Bergman. I'm a producer from Manitoba, and today I'm joined by René Watt, producer from Quebec. The Canadian Pork Council's on-farm program called the Canadian Pork Excellence is based on HACCP principles. Food safety, biosecurity are all intertwined, and the adoption of the stringent biosecurity protocols is a vital component of every producer's plan to keep their animals healthy and safe. Pork producers are investing significant amounts of money to improve infrastructure, including significant improvements in barns and traceability, measures to limit who can access a hog barn, all to improve biosecurity controls. And at the end of the day, the focus is to keep animals safe. But still, unauthorized entries onto our hog farms are one of the greatest threats to biosecurity. Over the past several years, and it's not new to you, I'm sure, we have seen an alarming increase in unauthorized entry on farms, with individuals illegally entering in our barns and other farm properties. That is very disturbing. These incidents put us, animals, and the entire food supply at risk. The reason why we have so much stringent controls over the access to our barns is to reduce the devastating risks that several diseases could have to our industry. So using my own farm for an example, a disease like PED or PRRS would cost my farm, not a large farm, between $260,000 and $320,000. Very, very significant money, which is a significant cost and detriment. The most concerning is African swine fever, which is an industry-killing disease. The cost of responding to and recovering from ASF outbreak would be measured in billions of dollars for all of our producers combined. Biosecurity is our best defense against the disease and unauthorized entries that puts us all at risk. I'll invite René Watt, my colleague, to say a few words at this time.
Thank you, Rick. Our investment in time, energy, and money are not enough to prevent unauthorized entries. Bill C-205 provides a means to deter trespassers that may expose animals to unnecessary stress, potential disease, or toxic substances. We want to underscore our commitment to being transparent with consumers in Canada and around the world. Transparency is essential for consumers to have confidence in how pork is produced, including ensuring that producers are living up to the high standard they set for animal health and welfare. Bill C-205 is not an attempt to limit transparency on our farm, but an attempt to protect animal health and welfare. We regularly speak to Canadians from coast to coast. We make it one of our top priorities to answer all people's questions about how pork is produced, including questions on animal welfare. Passing Bill C-205 will provide confidence to producers that their animal will not be put at risk by illegal trespassers that do not care or respect pigs, their health and welfare, and the health and welfare of their family pork producers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. And now maintenant nous avons les éleveurs de.
And now we have the Quebec pork producers. Mr. Duval, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today to represent the Quebec pork producers. First of all, you're talking about issues in terms of the act that should be adopted. So we have more than 1,700 farmers in the province of Quebec who produce about 7 million pigs that are processed in Quebec. Quebec is the largest pork-producing province, and we're the second largest agri-food sector of Quebec. Hog farming in Quebec represents 1.13 billion annually of Quebec's GDP and generates 1.8 billion in farm gate sales. There are 14,000 employees on hog farms and more than 30,000 Quebec families that live from the Quebec pork sector. So our Quebec farmers are proud to meet 80% of local demand for fresh pork, and the self-sufficiency rate for pork is about 400% in comparison. It's 298% for blueberries, 490% for cranberries, and 1,300% for maple syrup for self-sufficiency. So we're therefore very proud to export a major part of production to other countries, mainly to countries where natural resources do not permit them to have sustainable husbandry as in Quebec. Between 2009 and 2020, Quebec's pork export rose from 975 million to 2.1 billion for 2020. So an average growth rate of 7.2%, 7.25. This is an impressive average. This is in line with zero hunger and the responsible consumption and production goals of the UN 2030 agenda in which Canada participates. So this is to tell you that the pork industry and other farm industries of Canada are very important. So pork producers clearly are facing many risks. We heard that earlier, risks in terms of diseases, so we have to avoid that. I don't know if some of you have already visited a hog farm, but in most cases it's not everyone who can enter. Before entering, you have to sign a register, you have to change your clothes, your boots, take a shower, there has to be a sanitary area, and respect the biosecurity rules and also animal welfare rules. These are very important rules. It took several years to put them in place with various parties who were able to support us. So the biosecurity rules are very present and respected. The animal health depends on it. The pig's environment on the farm must be calm and stress-free. Animal welfare standards even recommend toys or even music. When a group of agitated people rush into our farms, the animal certainly experiences stress, and not just for pigs, it's the same thing for rabbits and other animals. And when they're upset, they can even die on the spot because people who don't know these rules in terms of animal stress break into that farm. So the consequences of breaking and entering on a farm are numerous. The stress on producers is also huge, as was the case recently for a farm where I know the family, a young family that started producing. This happened in 2019, but the law doesn't see it this way either in Quebec or elsewhere. If we look at the laws in effect in Canada and some provinces, there's nothing specific to livestock farming. We have to try to defend ourselves with the general laws of the criminal code or the civil code, and it's very difficult and costly. This bill sends a clear message from coast to coast that you cannot enter a farm without permission, full stop. It doesn't matter if the farmer put up a do not enter sign, put up a gate, or lock the door. You cannot enter a farm without permission. That can't be done. This bill is essential and is in line with what the Éleveurs de Porc du Québec and Canadian pork producer and my colleagues in other sectors have been asking for years. We also have to think about the threat represented by African swine fever. It's an illness that decimated half of the Chinese herd in the past year, and it would be devastating in Quebec or in Canada. So African swine fever is a disease that will spread if people come in, especially people who've been to other countries, who have been in other countries such as Belgium or Germany. The herds were contaminated. And a single case in Canada would threaten the survival of 7,000 hog producers. Quebec and Canada would lose an important economic partner, and it would be very difficult to achieve various objectives. So this disease is an example of why unauthorized entry on a farm should be forbidden in the manner proposed by Bill C-205 for the survival of a strong economic and agricultural sector. This piece of legislation is essential. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duval. And now we will go to the first round of questions. Mr. Lehoux, you have 6 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses who are here with us this afternoon. It's greatly appreciated. There got many answers to the questions we were asking ourselves. And what you said, Mr. Duval, maybe I'll start with you. This issue of the African swine fever. Are the measures put in place by Quebec producers, well, Canadian producers as well, taking to have better control? Are they significant enough so that if there's no unauthorized intrusion that you can be protected? It's clear that for Quebec and Canadian producers, that introduction cannot happen if it's somewhere where the biosecurity rules are observed. It's just for productions that are outside of these rules. But with our biosecurity rules, the arrival of this illness won't be easy unless there is an authorized entry. That's what we saw happen in other countries. That's the point that we can't control. And that could really be a huge risk for the Canadian economy from coast to coast. So we feel safe by this. So what I could understand, Mr. Duval, is that Quebec right now has no specific laws, but the fact that this bill could come into effect would help position pork production or pork farms in Quebec. Yes, there's no law that's been drafted for the agricultural sector. I've heard allusion to existing laws, but these are for housing sector. But in terms of the production, there's nothing that helps us. For example, there's been an introduction on a hog farm in Saint-Hyacinthe. It took 7 hours of parliamentarians with the minister and various lawyers to be able to see how we could get the 10 or so people who trespassed dishonestly on that farm, how they could be gotten out. So there are some provinces that have been more proactive, that have more stringent laws, but there are also many provinces that have nothing. That's why it would be good to have a law that would be in effect throughout the country. So what you've just said about that young farm, is that the example that you cited before concluding your presentation, your introduction? No, it's a young business. It's young parents with young children below 5 years of age who have just bought a farm, and they were just about to blossom. There were renovations to be made, but they were respecting all the animal welfare rules. Yes, it's that farm. Could you give us, briefly, could you give us some details on the collateral damage that this can create with a family like the one you've mentioned? I'll say that the first thing that comes to my mind is that family left farming. It was a huge stress for them. It was insult after injury on social media. It was really difficult for them. The mother experienced depression, and they left pork farming. I learned that recently because it was just too much. So that's really lamentable to have that kind of end result. So maybe from the Pork Council, Canadian Pork Council, Mr. Roy or Mr. Bergman, in its present form, is the bill something that responds to your expectations? This extra, is that satisfactory? It will provide additional protection, that's certain. And it's not just extra protection for the animals, but also for those who work with animals, the producers, the farmers, and also for consumers, because the biosecurity risk is broad. It's a question of unified health. It can affect all links in the chain. Thank you. Now a question for Mr. Vaillancourt. When you mentioned at the beginning that there was no need to be in contact with the animals, we didn't hear exactly the same thing from some preceding witnesses. I would like you to give us more about this element of contact with the animals. I've been a producer my entire life, and I know you don't have to be in direct contact, but I'd like you to hear you tell the committee. Yes, I'm a specialist in biosecurity. I've been doing research in that field for 30 years. I'm a consultant in 31 countries. And also I'm an expert in a French agency for African swine fever because, as you know, they had the African swine fever in Belgium recently. African swine fever is a good example. You can have a wild animal that has African swine fever that dies. Its carcass is rotting, and you're walking in the field where that animal died. That animal died in April, and we're now in May. You go home, you walk to where the soil was contaminated, and you go into a pig farm. You're not careful, the probability is quite strong that you will transmit that pathogen. Thank you, Mr. Vaillancourt, and thank you, Mr. Lehoux. And now,
for 6 minutes, go ahead, Mr. Boyce.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci pour tous les.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all witnesses for your testimony today. My first question is for Mr. Duval, and I apologize, my French is not that good. So you explained a situation on a farm in Quebec with some MPs, maybe they're federal and provincial and other stakeholders that were able to find a solution for that solution for the demonstrators at the farm. Where was the RCMP in that situation? Was it not possible to find the police to come and visit the farm? No, the farm, as soon as there was this trespassing, I'll say that those people acted in a very correct way. The producers, when they discovered the people on their farm doing a sit-in, they immediately called the police. They remained calm. They went home. They asked their employees to watch to make sure that no one harmed the animals, but they called the police. When the police came, there's no law that gave them the authority to evict those people or to who were holding a sit-in at the farm. They waited until a certain point where a magistrate said, well, you should really remove them and we'll see what happens afterwards. So one by one, they removed them. It took 7 hours before they could come out of the farm. The animals were not fed. All morning you could hear the animals crying out because they were hungry and they couldn't be fed because those people were doing a sit-in. So it was especially the municipal police and the Sûreté du Québec, the Quebec provincial police. There was no law that allowed them to evict those people. Thank you. And would it be possible to send a description of that?
To this committee, I'd be particularly interested because some of the arguments we've been having in this committee is around some of the existing laws and the fact that sometimes police or farmers don't ask police to take that on. But can you provide any evidence to the committee on this particular situation and others that might exist in Quebec? I'll take that as a yes if I go.
Je vais essayer de répondre à votre question.
So I'll try to answer your question. The first thing we tell the producer is that when they're was trespassing. There have been some recently, one on a dairy farm where the protesters tried to free the animals and to remove them from the farm. We tell the producers to stay calm. Sometimes if producers get hot-headed, things go off the rails, so we ask them to stay calm and to call the police. It's what we tell people who would see anti-animal actions. So there are laws, so it is important for us.
On, but I'd be particularly interested in seeing the evidence around police not having the ability to intervene or feeling like they couldn't. I think that's really relevant to this study. So thank you. Mr. Bergman, I'll turn to you and Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy talked about deterrence. And so when we look at these particular when we look at what Mr. Barlow has brought forward, and I think it's laudable in intent, my concern is when I look at the legislation, the proposed legislation, it really puts an onus that there had to be an intent to be able to breach the biosecurity element on farm. Have you had individuals come on your farm and, you know, did they have any awareness about whether it be the criminal code or other type of legislation that is trying to restrict this type of activity beyond, of course, the biosecurity? Can you speak to that?
So, first of all, we all have expectations of protecting our families and our properties. Matter of fact, maybe in some of the offices that you're sitting in right now, there is security, or in your home, there is security to prevent people from coming in. And when they come in, that's a wrong thing. Why not agriculture? I guess that first and foremost, that's really my question. Why not agriculture? C-205 is a very common sense bill. And to your question about, you know, when people come onto our farm unwelcomed, unannounced.
Mr. Bergman, I'm not disagreeing, and I know that you as pork farmers and many others across the country are doing incredible work on animal safety. That is not in question, I don't think, with the members of this committee. What I have concerns about is when I look at this particular piece of legislation, there is an onus that there has to be an intent to breach the biosecurity elements. And when I think about the average, look, I don't own a farm, and I haven't been privy to a sit-in from a particular group of protesters or activists that have concerns, you know, and so my concern is that both activists could be mindful of the biosecurity element and both sit in, or you know, really argue in front of any type of court that the intent to, you know, whether it be reckless or otherwise, was not there. And so it's about the teeth of this particular legislation. I don't know if Mr. Roy or others, or if you want to elaborate on that, but do you see any concerns there?
I would like to say that we have protocols to enter on the farm, and I don't see anybody who is not aware of this protocol being able to respect it. There is no way, because there is a list of things to do, and they are entering without our permission. This is the first breach of biosecurity without our permission. So after that, it's just falling one after the other, and the risk is really high.
Merci, Monsieur Roy.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Merci, Monsieur Bloy.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. And now, Mr. Perron, please go ahead. You have 6 minutes. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses who've come this afternoon. Mr. Duval, I'd like to talk to you. I'd like you to give the chance to complete your answer to Mr. Blois earlier, who said, how was it that the police had trouble in intervening? Do you have other examples? Why did it take 7 hours? Is there a big problem there that has to be fixed? Essentially, that is the gap. So the police came and said, under what accusation can we put them out? And all of that respecting the law. You can't take someone and get them to leave the house if the law doesn't give you the authority to do it as police services. There was nothing allowing them to put them out. And it was fortunate that up to a certain point, the people who were carrying out the sit-in were saying, all right, it's been we've been here for 7 or 8 hours. We'll leave. But if they wanted to stay there, they could have stayed there for the longest time. There was nothing preventing them from doing so. So we have nothing that's adapted to the agricultural sector in terms of law. Thank you. You also addressed the mental health aspect. You said that those people left the field of agriculture, which is dramatic. And also there could have been illness. There was maybe water, a problem with water, and that it was hard to make a connection between this trespassing and the later consequences. Yes, because it was suggested that we pursue these people under civil law, and so these people have to go to court, they have to go through all these emotions again. But to create the evidence to prove that people introduce this disease is the entire group that has to pay for the problems. These families lost several tens of thousands of dollars over a few weeks. Yes, there was mortality. There was mortality when they came into the farm. When they came into the farm, the animals thought they were going to be fed. They were not fed. The sows got up, they lay down again, they stood up, and they crushed their piglets. And who pays for that? You have to prove that in a court of law. And there's nothing presently that allows those people to present a defense that would allow them to be supported by a law. So it's up to them to defend themselves, and it's very complicated. So I understand that burden that the producers have to bear. Now I'd like to have your answer to people who tell us, well, if that law is enacted, that there will be no one to denounce ill treatment of animals. Can you talk about the measures that are in place in that regard now? Well, so this is the same way all throughout Canada. There are several ways of denouncing, of sending an alert. And every time there's a problem, there are technicians who do weekly visits to a farm. We have veterinarians and agronomists who come and verify the food and check what medications is given to the animals. Each animal has to have a treatment document, and these people, these farms are verified by a external auditor that could lose their status if they don't respect these inspections. And if those producers don't do their job properly, they won't be able to sell their animals to a slaughterhouse that's inspected by CFIA. And after that, there are the processors, and there's the Canadian Agency of Slaughterhouses that does an audit and for every animal that comes into the slaughterhouse. If they see anything that shows that the animal may have been mistreated, if it has red marks or it has a mark on its back or something is abnormal, they will directly call the producer, the MEPAC, the pork producers that I represent. And I say that does happen from time to time, but there's always a reason. There's always a recommendation that's made, either an immediate recommendation or maybe we'll be told, well, yes, there was this thing that needed to be fixed, needed to be changed. The area was not very clean. You have to clean it. There are interventions carried out. And that means that the producers have to do that. It's very, very detailed, this work. So a lot of people are interacting. There's no one who'll say, well, I'll just forget it. I'll just avoid it. And I won't do something and I won't get caught. Well, it's really clear to us that nobody gets away with that sort of thing. Thank you very much. And in terms of this act, the way it's written, the preceding witness suggested that we amend it to remove the place saying that the person cannot claim ignorance. What do you think of that? Well, I'll tell you that there's so much consciousness raising at airports for African swine fever about the impact that can be possible. So no one can really avoid that. So the way it's drafted now, Mr. Vaillancourt, maybe the bill in its current form, would that solve the problem in your opinion? Yes, currently what's being stated is that the person is trespassing knowing the norms that have to be respected, the standards have to be respected, and decided not to respect it. That's how I read it. I think that that's maybe not the best way to do it. What's important is that these people are not authorized. They have no mandate to be on the farm. Because being innocent by not knowing something that they don't know the biosecurity measures, to my mind, that is not something that should be considered. Thank you, Mr. Vaillancourt. Thank you, Mr. Perron.
Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Professor Vaillancourt, maybe I will start with you. I did appreciate in your opening statement how you took the time to also illustrate that there are other dangers to the uninitiated entering a barn. There's heavy equipment, livestock are large animals, and when they're spooked, they can move unexpectedly and cause serious injury to a human who are often quite a bit smaller. I've been looking at the parent legislation, the existing Health of Animals Act, and there are provisions in there like Section 9, keeping of diseased animals, Section 10, bringing diseased animals to market, Section 11, if you're selling or disposing of diseased animals, Section 12, throwing carcasses into water. It appears that the existing clauses of the Health of Animals Act can apply equally to farmers and farm employees if they engage in this type of behavior. Whereas C205, as it's written, seems to exclusively concentrate on someone who is there without lawful authority or excuse. You are an expert in biosecurity. Do you think C205 needs to be broadened so that it is in line with other sections of the existing act so that employees and farmers are held to the same standards in promoting general biosecurity?
Well, yes and no. Here's the deal. First of all, we do have biosecurity measures. Sometimes we have a compliance issue, okay, whether it's in swine, in poultry, or elsewhere. It's not unusual to have somebody not do exactly what should be done. But employers have means to deal with that. They have incentives they can provide, positive ones and negative ones. Like if we catch you doing this or not doing that, we can fire you. We can do. So I think that's where the game should be played when it comes to employees or technical staff per se. And we should not kind of mix these two things, because in one case, it's really criminal to get into a farm and you don't even need to cross. Okay. If you have contaminated boots and you get on the premises, you get in the entrance, you do not cross where the animals are, you may still have contaminated the site. And unless you have perfect biosecurity, and I've never seen that, okay, you're going to have a risk. That's why that is criminal. That's different from what an employee might or do or not.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then, there have been instances, of course, in farms where employees, I guess by not following proper procedures, did bring disease onto the farm. I'm thinking of British Columbia with COVID-19 on some mink farms.
Yeah.
Is there anything, I guess, that the federal government should be doing more generally to further the cause of biosecurity, or is this something that's best left to provincial jurisdiction?
Well, the CFIA already does something that we have established, and I worked on that, some guidelines. I think not only this should be left at the provincial level, but also quite a bit at the company farm level. Each farm is different. So we need to custom design these biosecurity measures, and we need to favor them. We need to provide positive incentives and all that, but this has to be done close to where the action is. The federal government can help by maybe assisting in some ways at the local level, but I'm not convinced that other than to establish some norms, which we have done. But if I had a wish, I would say when we established these norms at the federal level, they were one size fits all. We had in mind a backyard flock and a 200,000 egg layer operation.
Right.
They're not the same. And if we have primary breeding stock in Ontario in particular, that's not protected because we do not have regulations regarding distances between production sites, for example. So at a federal level, that might be of interest.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to squeeze one more question into to Mr. Bergman. I guess the theme of my question is really on deterrence versus enforcement, because we have heard testimony that the police are not always very quick to arrive on scene and sometimes seem unsure as to whether they should proceed with a case. If we were in fact to adopt C205, and I understand Mr. Barlow has made the case that CFIA can always work with provincial peace officers to enforce the law, but do we also have a problem of enforcement, especially in rural Canada? I mean, if we're going to add another law, it's not going to do much good if we don't have the force to back it up and follow through with it.
Yes, so we really believe the enforcement is a big part of it, because I mean the one domino falls, and without enforcement, what would be the deterrent for this to reoccur and others doing that? So I think enforcement is very much a component of all of this. Absolutely. Now, in rural settings, absolutely, that would be a different situation, not a different situation, but when you're more remote. But that said, I believe that society is coming along quite well, where they can react quicker to different circumstances. Doesn't matter whether it's remote or not, and I really believe it would help us to further protect our farms.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman and Mr. McGregor. We'll now go into our second round, and I understand Mr. Barlow is going to take the lead on that one for 5 minutes. Mr. Barlow, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here again. Mr. Duval, just wanted to start with you, and it's certainly heartbreaking when you talk about a farm family who has quit the industry, and we certainly cannot afford that when we're trying to attract young new farmers to the industry. But you mentioned about the lack of response from the RCMP. In the incident that happened with friends of mine here, it was in fact the protesters who phoned the RCMP because they wanted the RCMP to protect them, and they knew there would be very little consequences, if any. Now, to counter some of the questions from my colleagues, the CFIA has the enforcement and inspection services, investigators and specialists who are in place right now to enforce CFIA regulations. And they also have the public prosecution services to follow through. So it's not that the CFIA doesn't have the authority or the resources, it just doesn't seem to be that they are taking that as seriously as they should. Do you not think that if we made this a priority on the CFIA and their investigators, that would be a better deterrent with C205 there compared to what the RCMP or local police officers are doing now?
My impression is that the first responder, when there is trespassing or a break-in on a farm, that should be the local police. That's the one that can be deployed the fastest. It's like when there's a trespasser in a house, be it the RCMP or municipal police or the national police, they can come into play. And then there's the part of denouncing that part with the Canadian agency. Well, that's a second step that comes to validate as to whether there was ill treatment of animals or something like that. And I'll say that I'm the first person not to want to defend people who would dare to mistreat animals. So it's obvious that for me, that should be a first step. It's true that the police has to have a mandate from the law that allows them to go forward. So this bill is important for me because I see that currently police services and some governments just don't know what to do in that situation. And so Bill C205 is very important for us.
Much better knowledge of what they're dealing with than maybe a local RCMP police service. But to Mr. Vaillancourt, to your testimony, and thank you very much for your great information. what we've heard from many producers, and specifically the pork producers, which were today specifically concerned with African swine fever, for example, I think what we've learned from the COVID pandemic is the incredible devastating impact a virus can have on our economy. Are we prepared for an outbreak with African swine fever? And should we be proactive with deterrents such as C205 to ensure that we take every measure possible to protect the biosecurity on our farms?
Well, we'll never be prepared enough. This is a step that's positive because, you know, with that virus, you have a very resilient virus. It would be easy to bring it in voluntarily or not. It doesn't have to be in a big farm to create a national issue. We have a lot of traffic with the US, for example. Everything would be blocked with the consequence, for example, in the summer, if you have pigs on trucks that can no longer move, you can see the remarkable impact that this would have. So yes, billions of dollars. This would not solve a big part of it, but it would be an important step to help growers and everybody around get prepared for it.
Finally, Mr. Bergman, thank you very much for being here as well. If there were an outbreak of African swine fever or something along that line in one of your farms, or we saw rotavirus at Saint-Hazen, Quebec, which we hadn't seen in 40 years, this isn't something that would be resolved quickly. What would be the long-term ramifications to the industry if you had an outbreak of a virus like African swine fever?
Yes, and we're seeing that. Thanks for the question. We're seeing that occur around the world where it devastates the sectors in those countries. You look at China, you look at Germany and Poland and on and on. Our industry here would be decimated. It would be mass euthanasia of the animals because, folks, we export 70% of what we produce in Canada, pork producers. That's a tremendous opportunity, but it's a tremendous challenge if we have an internal problem with ASF here in Canada. So it was mentioned already. This bill is a super tool in our toolbox to limit that risk.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Sorry, time is up, and thank you, Mr. Barlow. And now we'll go on to Mr. Ellis for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Ellis. 5 minutes, sorry, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Well, I probably only need 4, but thank you, Chair. Rick, you don't note in your testimony, you mentioned there was an increase in protesters over the last few years. Could you just explain how many years and how these protests are taking effect? And do you seem them to be getting more radical and things like that?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you for that. The one that sticks out in my mind is, so in Western Canada, we've got Hutterite Brethren, the colonies, the Hutterite colonies, and they like to keep to themselves. And in a situation where there's an activist group that is so aggressive that would actually go to people who really want to stay amongst themselves and don't want to really interact, to me, that's an extreme concern because it tells us again that there's a level of, when people select the farms, they're being strategic, and it's a negative way of it's just a bullying form, which is really inappropriate, which is very inappropriate. So there are more and more cases, to your point, and it's very concerning to hear when there's selection of those who would be considered more timid because they feel that they can get away with more things with these folks. It's very unfortunate.
Okay, and I just wanted to touch, has your council across Canada lobbied any provincial ministers on a similar law that would take offense on a provincial level? And I'd send that to you also and to Mr. Duval.
Yes, so again, when the bill C205 was brought forward, we thought it would be a very significant victory across the umbrella of our Canadian production. So on the provincial side, to my knowledge, there hasn't been much of that at all.
Okay, and Mr. Duval, yourself?
Non, il y a absolument rien.
No, there's absolutely nothing. Currently, we mainly adopted animal welfare codes, which we were also proponents for. But for trespassing or activism on any farms, there's nothing going forward at the moment.
And I guess I just trying to wrap my head around this. And right now, if Bill C-205 was passed, how do you see timely enforcement? And I guess this is what we're going back to, enforcement and timely matter. I know there's police on the ground now, that municipalities have police forces and things like that. There's 444 municipalities in Ontario alone. I just can't comprehend how we'd be able to hire enough CFIA officials in order to enforce this law. And I think it was Dr. Stock that commented in the last panel. It does have merit, but it's going to get around to enforcement. So I guess I asked Mr. Bergman, how does your organization, I guess, what would timely fashion of implementing charges under this if it was came into law?
Well, we look at the example of what has happened in Quebec. Mr. Duval told us a story. 7 hours. That's just not appropriate at all as far as response time. As far as the length of time it takes for police officers to get to a location, that's a big question because locations are all over the place. However, if we make it so it is a crime, then they would be activated to do so in the quickest way, and I believe that would be really important for us to focus on.
Okay, and I just one last question, and I think it was in maybe the last panel's testimony. Do you feel that there's a problem with the laws that the way they are being enforced now, or is it the courts that aren't reading and interpreting the laws that we have now?
Well, really, what is the law? And that's what we're talking about right now, is C-205, and maybe Mr. Wall would like to respond to that as well, maybe a Quebec perspective. But we really need to have a law in place, which we're seeking.
And you don't think right now the provincial and municipality laws are uniformed enough to take effect what is taking place now?
Well, based on the evidence of what's transpired over the last 2 years with people walking into farms and putting the animals at risk, no, not at all.
Okay, thank you. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. And maintenant, Monsieur Perron, 2 minutes.
And now, Mr. Perron, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Duval, just for more clarification, I don't think we understood each other in the last question. The present text of the bill talks about someone who has knowledge and knows that they will be representing a risk to biosecurity. But now we're talking about it to amending it. Should we modify it so that someone who enters cannot claim ignorance? Yes, it's clear. We worked very hard, the agricultural sector and the pork sector, to let people know. We've put posters everywhere. We do a lot of work in our municipalities to explain what pork husbandry is. So if someone said they didn't know, well, they would have to show that they don't know how to read. Mr. Roy, what's your vision on this? Do you think we should simplify the law in that way? Yes, because we cannot have this. We saw some people use various pretexts to get around the existing law. So we have to create a law that will not allow us to allow people to get around it by claiming ignorance. And what do you say to people who say, well, they won't be able to denounce mistreatment of animals if that law is adopted? The number of structures that we've put in place to ensure the quality, the health, and the welfare of animals that we produce. So I have no problem in defending our current system, which is able to find problematic cases. Mr. Vaillancourt, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this. Well, listen, those people are not in agreement with the very idea of pork production. So even if it were done in the best possible conditions, state of the art, they would want to denounce it. That's what they want to denounce. So the witnesses here working in the pork sector are saying rightly, we have ways of correcting the situation if there is a problem. But for those people who want to break in, that doesn't matter because they want to go much further. Their goal is to eliminate production. It's not at all the same thing. Thank you, Mr. Vaillancourt. Thank you, Mr. Veron.
2.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just have one question for the Canadian Pork Council. Just regarding the provincial acts that were passed in both Alberta and in Ontario. So Alberta has the Trespass Statutes Act, and Ontario has the Security from Trespass and Protecting Food Security Act. Were any of your members involved in consultations before the drafting of that law? And do any of your members have any specific feedback on how those individual statutes have worked as a deterrence thus far? Anything that you can add that you haven't already stated to the committee?
Yes, so to my knowledge, I am unaware if our representatives from Alberta have had discussions like the pork organizations with it. I would be surprised if they haven't, but I'm testifying that I'm not sure. And maybe Rene would have an answer from the Ontario perspective. He's a neighboring province, but all I will say, Mr. McGregor, is that the provincial pork organizations are quite engaged when things become activated, and they're also quite alarmed when their farms are being broken into. So I would assume that there'd be some correspondence.
I would like. I do not have so much to add on the effort. I know that there has been some effort, but I don't know to what extent. So I cannot comment to what extent. But I would like to stress the fact that the present bill will help not only to protect the animals, but also the consumers. And I think it's something that we have to remember. It helps all the industry, all the supply chain. And yes, we can focus on trespassing, but it's much more than this that we try to protect. It's our whole food supply chain. And I think it shouldn't be underestimated.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Et maintenant, ça termine notre deuxième.
And now this ends our second panel.
Individual, Dr. Jean-Pierre Vaillancourt, d'être venu à notre comité. Aussi, le Conseil canadien du porc, Mr. Rick Bergman and Mr. René Roy. Thank you so much for being here. Et les éleveurs du porc du Québec, Mr. David Duval, merci. And thank you to all our committee members. Thank you to our staff also and interpreters. They do a fantastic job. Sometimes we forget to mention them. So again, thank you. This will be all for this meeting, and we shall see you in the next one. On vous voit la prochaine. Merci tout le monde. Bonne soirée.
Thank you very much. Merci, au revoir.